Around the world, we've seen record low interest rates, haven't we? And banks have had to deal with this and the hit to their margins and profitability, along with the poor old savers out there who've literally got nothing for their deposits in the bank. What's your outlook on what will happen to bank margins, say, over the next year or so, as hopefully, with maybe the exception of a couple of countries like China, we're going to see a normalization of interest rates over time?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the banking sector certainly is awash with liquidity, and there are more savers than spenders at this point in time. So without a doubt, I think there is, we are living in an era of low interest rates. It's obviously hard to predict what's going to happen to the interest rate environment, but there is a search for yield. And I think one of the reasons why we are seeing such a bifurcation between the valuations of banks and the non-banks is a lot of that is going into new players who are offering higher yields because they've got a lower cost model and are able to pass on that to consumers. So the search for yield in some ways is leading to, in many ways, a movement away from the banks to many of the newer class players in the market.
Joydeep, you raise a very interesting point about the business models being under tremendous strain, and I'm just wondering how much of a threat is fintech? Does it still pose an existential threat to the legacy banks? And with the exception of DBS, where are they in that digital transformation journey? And do you expect consolidation and acquisitions? If you can't beat them, buy them.
Sri, we've been talking about this for a while, but I think, and I hate to use a cliche, but we are truly at a tipping point at this time. And in many markets now, fintechs or technology-led financial services players now already account for close to 30% of the business and about 5 to 10% of the revenue. And the reality is that capital markets are already voting with their feet on this. So if you look at the 65 players who are effectively capturing most of the 2 trillion of value accretion that has happened during the last 18 months, almost all of that have gone into fintech or specialist players or payment players, etc., and not to the traditional banks. In that context, I think the transformation agenda for traditional banks is quite daunting. A lot of this value creation can be explained by geography. It can be explained by scale. It can be explained by the segment in which you compete, and indeed your business model. And the reality is you can't change your geography. It's very hard to change the segment. It's very hard to change the scale, except if you acquire, and those are far and few. But what you can do is change the business model. But there are very few institutions who have the ability to change it so rapidly, given just the complexity of incumbency.